As part of our series about the greater Chaco landscape, we've shared interviews with the Pueblo of Acamá's Teresa Pascual and Mario Atencio with Danae Care. Now, we bring you out into the field with Mike Eisenfeld of the San Juan Citizens Alliance to show you some of the energy development in northwestern New Mexico. Of course, a portion of Chaco Canyon and some archaeological and sacred sites are protected within a national park, but Eisenfeld showed us around a vast area outside the park boundary. As he explained to us, technological changes, especially what's called horizontal drilling, piqued interest in the southern San Juan Basin beginning around 2010. Since then, hundreds of new wells have been drilled, and there are plans for thousands. Yet, for more than a decade now, the federal government has continued to consider that development exploratory. San Juan Citizens Alliance and other groups too have continued to ask the U.S. government to study drilling's impacts more deeply and update management plans for northwestern New Mexico. Under the Biden administration, the U.S. Department of the Interior has talked about an Honoring Chaco initiative, which focuses on how to protect Chaco Culture National Historic Park and a 10-mile buffer around the park. But as Eisenfeld showed us, there is so much more to the greater Chaco landscape than just the national park, and there is also a lot more development out there than many New Mexicans might realize.
Where I live in the northern part of the San Juan Basin, kind of in the Farmington area, it's not unusual for there to be historic or legacy wells, as many as like 25 per square mile. But the southern San Juan Basin that encompasses Chaco, there's never really thought that there was going to be high probability. And so around 2010, was really sort of when all of a sudden there was this idea that there was going to be a boom with shale, that they could horizontally drill. And so the Mencos Shale and the Mencos Gallop formations kind of became, at that point, the focus in an exploration phase. And so one of our primary concerns is that exploration all the way to 2022, it's never been assessed cumulatively. It's never been assessed for development. And there's all these other issues that are now prevalent in 2022 that need to be part of the mix, that are being ignored by the government agencies that have a vested interest in approving oil and gas. That's a oil well that was drilled probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And what you're seeing are sort of like oil tanks for collection of the oil. And then there's a compressor on it, which has like 24 hours noise to push product into the pipelines. And there's pipelines out here. So really what you get kind of is an interconnected system of a bunch of wells feeding into large pipelines. And these pipelines all go to like the 550 corridor and then are going down, I believe, to Albuquerque in that area. Stuff like this shouldn't be allowed, like surface lines that are hanging across arroyos. Just shouldn't be allowed to happen. Just unacceptable from a health and safety perspective. There's a lot of impacts. Like for a while here, they were after oil, so they were flaring the natural gas into the atmosphere. There's lots of volatile organic compounds. There's benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene off of these well pads. There's noise impacts. There's water. They first told us that they were going to use nitrogen as a fracking agent. This is fracking. So, people go, hey, when fracking comes to your community, and it's like, well, that train left the station here in the San Juan Basin in the 1960s. I think that a lot of these lands, they're supposed to be managed under multiple use. And kind of as you can see behind us, I mean, this is incredible Badlands area that at one point was considered a specially designated area by the Bureau of Land Management for paleontology. Fossils probably everywhere, lots of petrified wood everywhere, but also just, the cultural values of the greater Chaco landscape, which has never really been given the vetting that it deserves. Industrialization of the landscape is incompatible with the Honoring Chaco initiative, and then we always get into a big argument where people are like, well, what's so compelling about this area? And that's not for me to say. I mean, I think that there's, better people to start to talk about their connectivity to the land, but it's the whole landscape. It's not like, I found an archaeological site over here. This is all part of kind of the extended Chaco phenomenon. And I really feel like that should be the focus of these agencies, is to really consider kind of the legacy, and because so much of the rest of the San Juan Basin has already been drilled for oil and gas, I feel like these areas that are relatively pristine should have been kept pristine, and that sites like this, have impacts that have not been evaluated. So until they're evaluated, I think I'm going to be a bit concerned about the whole entire process. Oil and gas permitting need to do a way better job with maintaining the roads and maintaining the infrastructure. And then there's not a lot of money going back into these communities. That has to change. Should have been a national park, man.